Hey guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica. I'm your host. We're going to be going over not all the transfer news, but we are going to be talking about Thomas Partey because he could be leaving Arsenal this summer. So make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel and get in the chat and let me know what you are thinking about this news. Not going to lie, this is not the first time that I've heard this news. It's kind of been bubbling under the surface. I think Ryan Taylor Sport was the first one that came out with the news saying that Arsenal have no intention of extending his contract. And because he has 2 years left on his deal, he could be sold and replaced this summer. And now that Fabrizio Romano has came out with pretty much the exact same report, and also as spoken about Lavia being the player that we want to replace Thomas Partey, I think it's time we have the conversation because this, I think, would be for a lot of people very surprising and like earth-shattering, just because I think the idea and the assumption for this summer was going to be Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey stay, they move to the bench, and then we bring in other players, and then that's how we improve the squad. And it's not looking like that's the way that things are going to go down. And we've always had questions around squad depth and, being so thin in certain positions. And so if you do move on Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey and kind of like replace them with, let's say, Rice and Lavia, is that you have the same depth that you had last season, or less than that? Are they actually better than those two? The questions start to really circle, and why would Arsenal even entertain moving on Thomas Partey when he's somebody that when he's on his game is one of the best players in the team? And so there's a lot of different layers to this, and we're going to obviously talk about all of those. I think the issue is that what fans tend to focus on, which is it's not a problem. It's what fans are supposed to really focus on is what's going to be the best for us winning. What's going to be the best for us winning? Obviously, having like Rice and Lavia or Rice and Caicedo and Partey and Jorginho and Xhaka and ESR and this player and that player is the best. But there's so many different layers when you start thinking about whether or not you want to move a player on. And for Thomas Partey, every single one of those reports have reiterated the fact that Arsenal don't want to extend his contract. And he has 2 years left on his deal, and he is one of the highest paid players at the club. He's being paid about like around £200,000 per week, which is quite a bit. And, with 2 years left on his deal, you have to figure out if you want to stick or twist. That's just kind of industry standard. You don't want players to get into the last year of their deal and then potentially leave on a free. And with a lot of Arsenal fans, I think, complaining over the years about Arsenal not selling players also requires you sometimes to sell players before it's obvious. The thing is that we always want that to align with players that we don't like, or players that we don't think are good. So players that you want to sell before time, you want to sell guys that, you're not sure about. But Thomas Partey is not necessarily a player that falls in that category for a lot of people. So that's where, kind of the, I think, uncomfortableness of it all comes in, is because it's like, yeah, I want to sell players and I want to make sure that we're selling players for a fee, but I want it to be players that I don't want to be at the club. And players that leave for a fee tend to be players that are a lot better than the guys that we just let sit around on our bench for a long time. So it's uncomfortable. I get that. But let's talk about it. Let's see what you guys are saying. 503 Nick says, thanks for making these videos. No problem. This is as good for me as it is for you guys. Like, I know you guys like getting in the chat and like letting me know and letting each other know what you think. This actually helps me like process how I feel about things as well. So it's so much fun. Jay says, if we sell Partey, Caicedo is a must. I think Caicedo is kind of like off of the table, but yeah, John P says it would be fine if Caicedo comes in as well. Roman says, considering we are willing to pay over 50 million for Kai, I won't allow less than 40 million for Partey. Terrence Tibbs says, my sources tell me Arsenal are keeping Chelsea busy in negotiations with fake Havertz so that we can secure Caicedo under the radar. I'm sure that's what we want to happen, but I'm not sure that's what is happening. But if that was true, that would be funny. Monty says, what? Fabrizio only said there are concrete chance he could move. They as well said no talks to extend the contract. There's concrete chances anyone could leave. Not really. I don't agree with that. I think there are players that we know for sure aren't going to leave, And so even though he said there are concrete chances, and that doesn't necessarily mean that 100% Thomas Partey is going to go, there are players in the team that we know for sure are not going anywhere. So there aren't concrete chances for everybody to leave. Thomas Partey did, for me, fall into that not so sure category. Remember when we kind of spoke about, um, you know, buy, sell, or sell, loan, keep the other day? Partey was somebody that I didn't put in the like crucial category, because there's always like an underlying thing with him, because there's obviously an elephant in the room. I don't like to talk about it on this channel, but we all know what it is, that if we take away our emotions around like he's a good player, there is a very good reason to potentially move Thomas Partey on this summer. So there's that. The fact that, if we talk about his overall time at Arsenal, for somebody who's one of the most he's one of the highest earners, but he doesn't play like one of our highest earners when it matters. And that's really the truth. Thomas Partey is somebody that I rate very, very highly, but he cannot be one of your most important players. And so he also should not be paid as much as one of our most important players, because he does not act like that player when it really matters. I'm sorry, but he's either unreliable, meaning that like he's not available because fitness issues, or he's unreliable in the moments that matters, and he drops these really bad performances that people try to make it into something that it's not. He's dropping 2s out of 10s when we really need him to be the guy that's kicking us forward. And I can't name very many times where Arsenal really needed him to step up, and he did. So he's, for me, like was always kind of in that category of, well, if a good offer comes in, you should probably consider it, because he's not going to get any better from here. The last thing you want him to do is completely fall off of a physical cliff next season. And idealistically, you'd want to keep him for one more year and then, sell him next summer. But what if he wants to run his deal down? What if Thomas Partey is like, I'm making £200,000 per week. I'm in London. I'm comfortable. I'll just, instead of leaving next summer, I'll leave the summer after. Then Arsenal fans will be complaining about not getting money for our players. So he was never in a category of like, he could not ever be sold. And there definitely are players that have no chances of leaving this summer, and we know who they are. He is not one of them. So yeah. Let's see. Fortis Gunnar says he's not the only one that dropped off when it matters. He's not the only one that dropped off when it matters, but he's a lot more experienced than everybody else, and he's being paid a lot more than everybody else. So Rob Holding being shit, or, I don't know, whoever being crap, let's just say Saka. Let's say Saka, because he dropped off a cliff as well. Saka is 21 and is kind of like just getting his feet underneath him. Next season, we'll obviously have different expectations of him, because he'll be paid like one of our best players. But this season, he was on like £30,000 per week and was 21 years old, and leading us for a large amount of time in the season. Thomas Partey dropped 2s out of 10s when he's being paid £200,000 per week and has a lot of experience and should be pushing us over the line. I don't think it's an excuse that everybody fell off, so it's okay that Thomas Partey did as well. Like, every situation is different, layered, and requires nuance and context. Ramsdale, he had his mistakes that he made. Gabriel made mistakes. All these guys made mistakes, but they're not being paid £200,000 per week. You know what I mean? And that makes a difference in my opinion. But that's not to say that I feel like he should 100% be sold. But what I'm saying is that with everything considered, he's not in the non-sellable list. I don't think I wouldn't expect him to be in the could not be sold list. And we know that there is one. Saliba, fucking Ramsdale, Saka, Martinelli, Odegaard. These guys are they're non-transferable. Everybody else is kind of we're not sure, Let's see. Rep says, I don't mind selling Partey and Xhaka in the same window if we can replace them, but Rice alone isn't enough, and it really isn't. And that's the fear, is that, Xhaka and Partey were so important to the team that if you replace them with substandard alternatives, then, you know, are we actually moving forward? Are we stagnating or going backwards? And so I can completely understand the uncomfortableness of that, because it's like, we know what we're dealing with Thomas Partey and Xhaka. We know what the ceiling of that is. I think we reached the ceiling with those two, by the way. I don't think there was that was as good as it was going to get with those two leading us in midfield. But we know, at least, you're a Champions League level team with those two. The issue is that, like, we want to be more than that, and taking them out and then replacing those two with Havertz, uh, Lavia, however you say it. I've seen so many people say it differently, and Rice, Havertz, and Lavia. Is that better than those two? Um, I'm not sure. Um, let's see. Boy says Partey is way overrated. Um, well, you know what it is. I kind of hear what you're saying on that. Like, I think when you get to the top level of elites, kind of like sport, I do feel like you have to have more than just being good on a sunny day. So when it really matters, you have to stand out and lead your team and lead them over the line. And I think where Thomas Partey becomes overrated is at the beginning of the season, everybody was saying that he was just as good as Rodri, right? And he was playing to a similar level, but when it came down to it, and they were going for the Champions League and the Premier League and the FA Cup, Rodri played a very important role in them getting over the line in those three competitions, where Thomas Partey severely faded. And so, is he a top player on his day? Is he a good player? Would you like to have him in your squad? Absolutely. But do you want to be relying on this guy? Do you want this guy starting every game for you in the biggest games and the most, the times where things are on the line and, you want to win trophies and stuff like that? Hell nah. We've had 3 years of Thomas Partey, and we know that at Arsenal, he's not leading us anywhere. And so that's where he becomes overrated. Like, good player, top player on his day, but my God, when it really matters, that guy goes missing, and that's not good. So that's why he's not safe from being transferred out. Arsenal can't I feel like Arsenal can't, like, they have to weigh up is it better for him to stay another year and have him as that option, but potentially lose him on a free and have to have, like, a whole nother year of him knowing that he's going to leave for free, paying him those high wages? Because again, if you have players on these high wages, the players that you want to bring in, sometimes you can't bring them in because you have too many wages that you have to pay. So is it worth paying him potentially for 2 more seasons, 200 something thousand pounds per week, maybe losing him on a free? Or do you cut your losses now and replace him with somebody like, Lavia or Caicedo or something like that, and just, like, move on? Because at 2 years left on the deal, everybody's saying, like, "We'll just keep him for another year." But there's no guarantee he'll leave next summer. And I think that's why Arsenal are weighing up their options. It's not 100% sure Thomas Partey is still an Arsenal player, but with the reports coming out today, they're definitely considering getting rid of this guy, which I think is shocking a lot of people, which I totally understand, because, like, I think most people would have said, like, yeah, Thomas Partey going to stay 100%. Let's see. Terrence Tip says Partey had a lot of distraction last season. Mutasimu says, if Rice gets injured before the CL final, are you comfortable with Lavia playing? I don't know. Like, I don't know if I'm not sure, like, his inexperience is probably the only thing that makes me a little bit like, "Oof," you know? But, have I seen anything from Partey at Arsenal that makes me feel like he would lead us to glory in a Champions League final? No, I don't. So it's one of those where people are acting like Thomas Partey is a slam dunk, but he ain't. So it's one of those where, you know, I asked this question the other day, and I'm still asking this question now. Is experience overrated? Can quality overcompensate for experience? It's like if Lavia is super, you know, talented and he's already played in the Premier League and he can slot in, he has very good players around him. Does it matter as much as if he has experience, if he has other players around him that know what they're doing? Do you know what I mean? I feel a little bit torn on this whole ideal like that we like it's all about experience. I think we overemphasize experience sometimes and we just need better players. Like we just need really good players and things will fall into place. Um, but you know, that's just me. Ultimate Spell says really a risky way to overhaul the midfield, but it is what it is. Jorginho must stay. That's the funny thing about it is that like who would have thought that like potentially like out of the three of Jorginho, Xhaka, and Partey, Jorginho would be the only one like left standing potentially. Like I think that's something that nobody really considered. But I think Arteta really likes Jorginho. I actually have grown to like Jorginho a lot more than I thought I would. I still would feel like three midfielders need to come in, but I'm also in the camp of like, I'm not sure that I believe that Xhaka and Partey are so good that they can't be replaced. I think there's like, I see people kind of, I feel like it's performative to like say like Xhaka and Partey are so good that like Lavia, Rice, they can't compete at all. I think the issue is not so much about the gap in quality between those four players or those two pairs of players. It's the squad depth that's more of a question for me because I'm really sorry, but like as good as Xhaka was this season and as good as Thomas Partey was for parts of this season, there's a clear ceiling with those two, and I think we can do better. And I think Rice and Lavia would do a good job. To be honest, it's more about losing them as depth pieces for me because I don't rate Xhaka and Partey as like our midfield duo as highly as other people. Um, Gunnar Lee says, I think Partey stays. There is a chance that Partey stays. I just, you know, there's something there, if they're even considering selling him, there's something there. And so I think people should the thing about this window is nobody actually knows what's happening. And I think we all had expectations and thoughts and assumptions before. And I think we're learning very quickly that we know nothing. And so, yeah, even the thought and the idea that they're like behind the scenes, and they're considering offers and talks for him to exit, that's pretty, yeah, that shows me that it's, they're really considering it, which is crazy. Maggie says, I'd rather keep him for another year. I don't think we brought him in with any intention on sell on value. Well, you know, that's I always thought that Thomas Partey would like retire at Arsenal, like and would just run down his contract. That's what I kind of thought. Um, but it's more than just what's going on the pitch, the off the field things as well. Like I think also people have to like also consider that there may be a part of that in there as well. Just saying. Benga says Partey needs to retire from international football to reduce his injuries. Hard to do that when you're the fucking captain, right? Um, uh, Tiang Yang says no guarantees of getting Lavia with Chelsea lurking. Partey's real age is out. Yeah, there's no guarantees of getting him, and I don't think like they would not sell him if they could not get a replacement. I don't think there's a world where you sell Partey and you're sitting there with no replacement. That's why all the reports have kind of come in conjunction with the Lavia, whatever news because like there's actually no reason to even get like Lavia if you're going to keep Thomas Partey. Because whenever we were kind of like having those initial conversations about the midfield, everybody was kind of like, okay, well, you know, we need all these midfielders, and I'm just like, but yeah, we need depth, but, like, there's also something as, like, having too many people in there, like, and so if you have Declan Rice, you bring him in, we know we're gonna bring in Havertz, like, I think we should just, like, suck it up like it's happening. You have Odegaard, you have Vieira, you have ESR, you have Jorginho, you know, I think that's a lot of DMs, like, having Jorginho, Partey, Lavia, and Rice, that's a lot of DMs, you don't need that many, so it was always kind of like, somebody has to go, for Lavia to even be in the discussion. I don't think Arsenal are gonna sit around and get rid of Thomas Partey and not bring anybody else in. Boy says, "Havertz done." I'm down for Havertz. Arteta's gonna embarrass Chelsea's coaching staff. I mean, one thing that I have been seeing, like, side note on the whole Havertz thing, is that some people are saying, like, no matter what, they're gonna, like, boo the signing, not, want the signing to do good because it's not a player that they wanted and they can't believe Edu and Arteta would do it. I'm just not that person. Like, if and when Havertz signs, like, I want him to do well because I don't know who in their right mind would want a signing to do poorly just so that they can be right. Like, people are fucking weird, but it's not something that I feel like people will be enthused by. And I think getting Arsenal fans to come around to him is going to take more than just like the odd goal. Like, he's going to really have to like show up. So it's a risk that Arteta is taking because a lot of the reports are saying that he's pushing, you know, and the recruitment team needed some, convincing because Arteta really wanted him. So it's, Arteta that the one that needs to be looked at when it comes to Havertz, that's just what I've been reading, but if he thinks he can save him, then, hopefully he does, because the reality is, like, anybody that puts on the shirt, like, I want them to succeed because, like, I'm not an asshole. Yeah. Chris says, "I am skeptical of Havertz, but so was I on Odegaard, White, Ramsdale, and they proved me wrong, so I trust Super Mikel Arteta." Skepticism is totally, like, I totally get it, like, why would you not be skeptical of somebody that you've probably never seen really play that well in the league that you're in? Do you know what I mean? So I expect the skepticism to last for a while. I'm skeptical myself, but again, like I said, I still want him to do well because I'm not a weirdo. DR says, "It's just insane to fund Chelsea. Shouldn't we be doing everything possible to make sure that they fail FFP? Why give them 60 million to balance the books?" Because they're going to balance the books regardless. Like, I think people have this idea that, like, we're going to fund all their transfers. Chelsea, they already have money, and then they're going to sell half of their players to Saudi Arabia. Manchester United are going to buy them out. Like, people are going to buy their players regardless. So we're not really doing shit. Not buying a player that Arteta really wants just for the sake of not funding somebody that's going to get those players anyway feels really short-sighted to me. And that's just not, I don't think that's how clubs really think about it, to be honest. Sohan says the mid will probably be Rice at the 6, Odie and Havertz in the 2 8s. I think, yeah, we're doing a lot of assuming. That's what I think as well. But, like, you don't know because some people are saying that Havertz is a forward option. Some people are saying Havertz is a midfield option. So who really knows? But yeah, just hopefully we have like the different options to like change and move things around because I don't think you can play every single game with like Havertz and Odegaard as 10s. You know what I mean? Um, and just like Rice at the 6, you need to do something else as well. But, there's the option to play Odegaard and Rice a little bit further up and then doing something different behind. So yeah, I just hope we have the options. Macau says you want to keep Jorginho and Elneny, rather move Xhaka and Partey. No, I just like Xhaka wanted to go though. Like, I think I still think people like ignore obvious information to suit their narratives. Not saying you're necessarily doing that, but Xhaka like wanted to leave. And so this whole like Arsenal are getting rid of Granit Xhaka, he didn't want to stay. And I am not a believer of making people stay when they don't want to be there because then they don't perform as good. And Xhaka has wanted to leave for a while. So he stayed 2 seasons too long, and the idea that, like, we can't move on and be better without Granit Xhaka for me is, like, very like short-termism, like revision, like right now, like um not remembering that like there was 6 years where we just weren't that great with him in the team. He's done well, but like we can move on from him. Partey though, the issue with moving Partey on is because he's because you would need to bring in somebody, and he's a little bit more difficult to replace than Xhaka. Xhaka's you can replace what he gives you, like you just can. But Partey is different. He is somebody that like you need to get somebody specific, a DM that can control the ball and also has the physical attributes. And Lavia does have those, but he's so much younger, that it's hard to tell whether he would hit the ground running at Arsenal or take some time. That's the risk that you're taking. So I think that he's quite talented. It's like, okay, does he hit the ground running type thing? That's the issue. But the whole like, oh, we're moving on Xhaka. Xhaka wanted to leave. So if you're upset at anybody, be upset with Xhaka because he's the one who didn't want to stay. You shouldn't just keep people because they don't want to, because you just want to keep them. Doesn't make sense. Um, let's see. Malia says exactly. Magambo says, how does El Neni improve us? I don't want Xhaka or El Neni. I don't think El Neni is going to play that big of a role. I don't even count him as like the midfielders. Arsenal need at least 2 quality defensive midfield options. Right now we have Jorginho and we have Partey, and hopefully we bring in Rice. If you get rid of Partey, then somebody needs to come in, and the option looks like it's going to be Lavia. You don't need 4 or 5 DMs. Like that's just, I don't know why people are getting it caught up in their head that like because we had injuries, that means that we have to have like 4 or 5 options. We need 2, max 3. Nobody has 4 or 5 DMs. Like that's just wild to me. And then in those attacking positions, you need like 3 or 4 guys that you can really count on. Right now we have Odegaard. You're going to bring in Havertz. I know people don't want him, but that's just the player that's going to be there. And then you have 2 players that people aren't completely sure about in ESR and Fabio Vieira. So, there's that. But yeah, Brandon, I'll send you the link in a second. Let me see. Let's see. Give me just 1 second. I'll send it to you on Twitter. Sorry guys, just give me 1 second. Are you on Twitter? Are you? Hold on, guys. I'm just trying to give Brandon the link. What is your... Are you on Twitter? Let me know. There you are. Gotcha. There. Okay. So yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. Let's see. Errol says Rice deal is close. Breaking news. Hopefully it is. Mark says Arsenal are wasting an opportunity to really push for the title with this wasted 60 million on a donkey. Fair enough. Like I get people are like super upset about like about Havertz, and I expect them to be, you know what I mean? And just because I'm like not screaming and yelling doesn't mean that I'm not apprehensive about it. I don't know what else to be other than relaxed. you know? Because nothing has really happened yet, if that makes sense. Until something like is set in stone, things are ever changing, and I think I would drive myself crazy getting like upset like a lot of other people like off of every link, every rumor, you know what I mean? Let's see. Mr. Gamer says, is it true that Ruben Neves is going to Saudi Arabia? Yes. That's like, I think it's here we go confirmed at this point. Kayinda says, am I the only person who thinks Zinni would do great job in the Xhaka role? He can help our midfield stability in case Partey is going to move on. There's a reason why Zinchenko doesn't play in midfield, and I don't know what that is, but if Pep and Arteta are both like not putting him in that position, I think there's a reason why, so I don't think we'll see Zinchenko playing in that role, even though I know a lot of Arsenal fans want to see him play it. You know, let's see. Doctor, I'm not doing that. If Super Mick came out tomorrow and wanted Harry Maguire, all these soft femboys would be putting up compilation videos comparing him to Tony effing Adams. This fan base has no shame. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that just want to hope that a team or a player does well if they put on the shirt. Obviously, a lot of us have done a lot of slandering, I think, of Kai Havertz over the last 3 years, so it's hard to flip-flop back and forth. But the reality is that like we don't really know if it's a bad signing or not until he actually plays for us. And so I don't really blame people for wanting to try to see the positive side, because if he does end up being an Arsenal player, I think there's no real excuse for anybody wanting him to do poorly just to be right. So yeah, it is kind of like, a little cringe that some people are trying to make it seem like they've always rated him, because we know that we haven't. But like, I don't know, I can't really blame people for wanting to see the positive side, or I also can't like blame people for being mad as well, if that makes sense. I think we have a hard time accepting that some people just do things differently than others. Let's see. James says, I'm more curious with Havertz completely misused at Chelsea. If I was confident he was coming in as CF depth, I would be against it, but he's coming in CM cam, then I'm open. Yeah, I think if he's not playing midfield, I would be kind of concerned about it a little bit. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and bring in Brandon and get his thoughts on it. Make sure you guys are liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, afternoon, Jess. How are you?
I'm good, enjoying my Sunday, talking about Arsenal's transfers. I haven't really spoken to you since the end of the season, so I'm sure you have tons of thoughts on everything. But before like you get into everything, I want to talk about Thomas Partey in particular, and the news that Arsenal are maybe considering moving him on, and bringing in somebody else to replace him, and like Romeo Lavia. Do you think that that would be like a huge mistake? Can you see maybe why Arsenal would want to move him on, or do you just think it's like he should be on like the non-transferable list?
Yeah, so I'm kind of in the middle of this one. I understand why Arsenal would be looking to replace Thomas Partey long term. He's 29, nearly 30 years old now. His injury record at Arsenal hasn't been great. However, when he is available and when he is playing for us, you see the complete and utter contrast to when he isn't playing. So it's not necessarily down to his qualities, I don't think. I think it's just Arsenal are looking to replace Thomas Partey long term. And they've decided, with the drop-off in his performances towards the back end of the season as well, that, maybe now's the right time to do it. Maybe even he's looking for a new challenge as well. So I'm not 100% against this. What I would say is we're making some big decisions in this transfer market by the looks of it. And, I hope it pays off. I really do, because, we're looking at Kai Havertz. That's a risky signing by Arsenal. Letting Thomas Partey leave, that's a risky, move again by Arsenal. And, we kind of have to have faith in the board, in Arteta. They've proven us to be wrong before. You remember the Aaron Ramsdale one. Nobody wanted Aaron Ramsdale at Arsenal. He's turned out to be an all right signing, and I hope it pays off. However, if it doesn't pay off, I'm sure people will need to be held accountable, because at the end of the day, last season, whether we should have been there or shouldn't have been there, we was up there fighting for a league title, and the expectation for the Arsenal fan base this season has to be very much the same thing, and possibly winning a trophy as well. So I'm a little confused with our business. I'm a little confused as to why this Declan Rice deal is not finished and over the line and done already. But we just got to sit back and wait and see what happens, I suppose, Jess, haven't we?
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's the thing. It's like, I feel like some people take my non shouting and yelling as like I'm agreeing with everything that the club is doing, because I do think it's a risk. Because if you bring in Lavia, who's 19, there's a big experience gap there. And you don't know if he's going to hit the ground running. You don't know anything, so it's
The,
kind of like going into the unknown. We know what Thomas Partey is, but we don't know what like a Lavia would be like. And there's
yeah,
a lot
see,
of questions. Yeah, because we didn't even know. Like, the thing is that when we went into the transfer window, everybody thought, okay, we're going to go in for Rice, we're going to go in for Caicedo. Now it's Rice, Lavia, and Havertz. That's very different than what people were expecting. So I understand like the what's going on here. But I guess I wanted to ask you, like, in terms of people saying like Xhaka and Partey are like so much better than like what Rice and Lavia would be, do you actually think like quality wise there's a huge gap in between like those two pairs of players? I think that's a little bit overkill.
yeah, I'd say that's probably a little bit overkill. I mean, the Thomas Partey one is more questionable because like I said, we've seen his qualities and how he transforms the Arsenal midfield. Not only that, I want to add to this as well, right? And this is probably, a point that a lot of people have not even thought of yet. Thomas Partey has Champions League footballing experience. So, and we're going to lose that. And we're going to bring in a player who, like you just said, is young, inexperienced, had a very good season with Southampton last season. And there's a lot of football clubs looking at him. He looks like he's going to be an exciting player and one for the future. However, we're going to be losing that Champions League experience within one of our, players leaving. And let's be honest, we don't really have many players at Arsenal that have Champions League football. You got Jesus, you got Zinchenko, you got Jorginho, but then after that, I couldn't really name anyone, and that's a big problem as well. Because again, if we take it back to last season, we see that what cost us the Premier League title in the end was probably the lack of experience in them big moments, in them last 8 games, and being able to get over the line. And I just worry that if you're bringing in a Lavia and you're letting one of your senior players go like Partey, it could be a similar story in the Champions League as well. So, but I don't think there's a massive difference in quality. If you look at Declan Rice for an example, he's a much better player than Granit Xhaka. He's a much better player. Lavia, I mean, again, you can look on it and say, yeah, he's a good player, but if you're being completely real, he's only had 1 season in the Premier League so far. But it's the same with Caicedo. I'd rather Arsenal go and spend 35, 40 million pound on Lavia than 75, 80, 90 million pound on Caicedo, because both players are similar in the aspect that they both had very good seasons, but they've both inexperienced in the Premier League, and nobody really knows exactly what we're going to get from them next season. And I'm not saying that Caicedo is going to have a massive drop off in terms of his performance and his quality, because I do feel like he's a quality player. But a good example to point to would maybe be Cucurella. Cucurella looked like an absolute baller at Brighton, and then he's gone to Chelsea and he just doesn't look the same player. So, that was another player who was brought off the back of having 1 good season in the Premier League for a lot of money, and he hasn't managed to replicate that so far. So,
Even
yeah,
Basuma as
interesting.
well. Like, Basuma was another Brighton guy that ended up not doing well. And we've been good with Brighton players because we got Ben White and Trossard, but there's no guarantees. And like, when you think about the difference between Caicedo and Lavia, I don't think there's that big of a difference or that big of a drop off between those two players. But you made a good point about like not having Champions League experience. Would you count Kai Havertz experience as we're adding it a little bit, or are you just like that don't count? Like, because he does have experience in the
Well,
Obviously.
in all honesty, though, Jess,
You
right?
want it.
People will laugh at this, and people will laugh at this, but Kai Havertz, he's kind of living off the back of that, Champions League final goal that he scored.
Yeah.
But at least he's a player that comes up in the steps up in the big moments, and comes up with things in the big moments. So from that aspect, yeah, you could say, we're kind of by bringing in Havertz, you're bringing in the Champions League experience as well. So yeah, I understand that one. I do fear though that Arsenal are going to try and use Kai Havertz as a false number 9, and if that's the case, then
Okay.
I really don't know what we're doing, Jess. I honestly don't. The only thing that I can think of, because at the time, obviously, like the rest of the Arsenal fan base, I'm sure you was as well, you're sitting there going, Kai Havertz, really? Like,
100%. Like, I definitely was like, well, when we were linked with Mount, I was like, okay, like, what's this? And then when it went to Kai Havertz, I was shocked. Like, I really, really was. And then I was like, okay, so what does that mean for Caicedo? What does that mean for Rice? And then, they reiterated that it was still Rice and, maybe Caicedo, but Havertz. And my only like feeling on the Kai Havertz thing is like, the reports around why Kai Havertz wants to leave Chelsea is the unrest and the instability, playing out of position. He doesn't really want to play false 9. He
mm,
wants to play his natural position as like more of like a number 10. And I was like, well, that makes a little bit more sense from an Arsenal perspective, because you could play him in 10 role next to Odegaard and, do something a little bit different there. But we just have to wait and see.
yeah,
It's just like, if I guess, because like, and this goes to like the super chat here is like, spicy whatever, I'm not going to say that. Thank you so much for your super chat though. Says, just what I really don't get is, considering you're going to spend 50-60 million on Havertz, is there seriously no 8 in all of Europe that Arteta sees as better, especially for that price? And I was thinking about like, what players could you bring in that position instead of, Kai Havertz, if you want to play him in like that attacking mid role. I don't really know of many that I would say, like, I know for a fact are better than him and would come to Arsenal. And
mm,
that's kind of like the thing, is because like we're always like, well, what's better out there? But first of all, definitive, like saying somebody is better, it has to be definitive. And sometimes I hear like these wild names, like guys that are playing in the French league and stuff like that. I don't know if that player is actually better than him, but it's hard for me to envision like Arsenal going to Real Madrid and like snatching Valverde or something like that, because he's not going to leave them to come to us. So is it a matter of like, looking at the player, knowing what kind of the player is? He's played in the league before, albeit he hasn't been good in the league, but Arteta knows him enough and feels like he's good enough to play. Like, because I don't see that many players where I know definitively that they're better than him. I just know
yeah,
that like he hasn't been good at Chelsea. Do you know what I mean? I
yeah.
can't.
See, the Mason Mount one made a little bit more sense to me, because the
Yeah.
way Mason Mount plays kind of suits the way that Arteta sets us up, in the sense that he will work hard, he'll press, he'll do all of that, off the ball work and stuff, and he's not too bad, in tight spaces as well. So that one made a little bit more sense. The Kai Havertz one, though, right? We have to question. And again, Arsenal fans that are completely against this transfer won't like what I've got to say, but we have to question as a fan base, if Kai Havertz was that much of a bad player, why would Real Madrid be registering an interest? Why would Bayern Munich be registering an interest? Even Manchester City have apparently made inquiries. Now, I don't know how true that is, but if he's that much of a bad player, why would these teams be inquiring about his services, whether it be that they thought that they could get him at a cut price or not? It's clear to see that, there are qualities there, and Chelsea just haven't got it out of him. And I can understand why as well. If you put yourself in Kai Havertz's shoes, since he's been there over the 3 years, they've had 3 different managers. One of them's been Fat Frank Lampard, who nobody rates,
I'm done.
and he's had to endure him twice. Then you've had Thomas Tuchel thrown in the mix, and then you've had Graham Potter, who's just completely and utterly looked out of his depth at Chelsea. So
Mhm.
I understand as well why Kai Havertz hasn't performed as well as what he maybe should have done for the money that he's come in for. And just having a settled manager with a settled system and a settled position might well do him the well of good. And you might see the same sort of Kai Havertz that we saw at Bayern Leverkusen. And if we're being real, if this was the Kai Havertz that's at Bayern Leverkusen, and we were saying that we was going in for him now, I don't think any Arsenal fan would have an issue with
No,
that.
of course not. It's just the layers of like Chelsea player. It's so many different things. It's Chelsea player. It's the fact that a lot of people view this as not getting Caicedo and getting Havertz instead, which I don't necessarily feel like is the actual facts. It's just how people feel. Um, and then it's just we haven't seen him like play well in this league. But like if it was the Leverkusen one, we Kai Havertz, I think a lot of people would be excited. And you know, I think when you look at Chelsea, they haven't had like a single attacker that's really performed well or consistently for years now. So it's hard for me to really say like it's 100% him. We were talking in the group chat earlier about Kai Havertz, and like one Chelsea fan was like, it's going to be really difficult for him to do well at Arsenal, blah, blah, blah. And then two other Chelsea fans were like, actually, they're concerned about him going to Arsenal because they know with the settled system and Arteta that we may get the best out of him. So I still think it's a wait and see type of scenario. It's uncomfortable. It's not exactly like, I think we would want a fresh player, somebody that we don't know maybe as much about, coming from a different league, boom, that has a lot of hype. But it's a wait and see. Coach Dave is saying, we watched you shout about Pepe for time. Now the white guy who's not as good as him is coming in, and it's let's give it a chance, knock it off. And I think the thing about Pepe, though, is like, first of all, nobody wants Pepe. Like, literally no one wants him. Like, like you already said, like Kai Havertz had suitors from Real Madrid. If the price was lower, we wouldn't be getting him because Real Madrid would have been really going for him. Bayern Munich, they just can't pay the price. Also, Man City were also looking at him. And we know Pepe is not good at Arsenal. I think that's the difference, is it's not so much about like Kai Havertz is like seen differently because of what he looks like or anything like that. It's we saw Pepe at Arsenal for 2 seasons and he wasn't great, but we haven't seen Kai Havertz at Arsenal, you know. I think that's the difference between those two. Or do you think I'm being unfair there? Is there like an element of like, well, if Pepe wasn't great and we wouldn't take Pepe back, then why would we take Havertz?
I kind of understand what they're trying to say, because again, we haven't seen from Havertz what we expected to see at Chelsea. So,
Yep.
You kind of put Havertz and Pepe in a similar bracket, because again, Pepe, he came into Arsenal, big reputation, a lot of money, and we expected more than what we saw from him. And it's the same with Kai Havertz, came in for a lot of money, big reputation, and he's not done enough at Chelsea. However, you're right, we haven't seen him play in this system. We've seen Pepe try and play in, this Mikel Arteta system, and it just does not suit him. Premier League football just doesn't suit him. And I actually, I weren't a massive hater of Pepe. I wouldn't say I was a massive fan of his, but I didn't mind Pepe. I did feel like, he was used wrong in the squad at times. And I do feel like, he should have maybe been given more opportunities. But at the end of the day, he's gone out on loan. He looks to be leaving permanently. And it's not like, Pepe's left and all of a sudden Arsenal are dropped back off to 8th place again or anything like that. We've actually made progress. So you have to kind of trust in what Edu and the manager is doing to a certain degree. Obviously, you have your own opinions on each individual transfer. But again, like I say, if we take it back to Aaron Ramsdale, nobody wanted him at Arsenal. He's come in, he's been a success. People were, very questionable over us bringing in Odegaard over Maddison. And then last season, Odegaard went and scored 15 goals and matched a record that's been held in the Premier League for years for a midfielder scoring that sort of number of goals. So, we have to kind of look on it and say, okay, Mikel Arteta and Edu are not exceptional in terms of their, transfer dealings and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's
But
not it's not 100%. Like, they definitely
yeah,
have
but who
some
is?
bad
And the
sides.
majority of the players that they've brought in have
Yeah.
been reasonably successful. So, you have to kind of trust what they're doing.
I'm the thing is, I think from my perspective, it's like I need to see them actually play before I like lose my shit. I just right now, like, I just can't bring myself to be like, because when nobody's signed, nobody's left, and I get some people want to put their take out there now, but I just wonder, like, if it does work out, how do you reel it back? Because we've seen that, like, Ramsdale was very unwanted. Like, he even said it in his re-signing video that I know a lot of you guys didn't want me, which I think speaks volumes to probably like how many bad messages he got. But he ended up being, a good signing. So I just want to kind of wait and see. But, from your perspective, like, before the window started, what did you think needed to get done? From the last season where we saw that we had some holes in the squad, maybe some depth issues. What were like your main things, like these things have to get done in order for it to be like a successful window?
Okay. So for me, I still feel like we need to work on our defence. If you look towards the back end of the season, again, I'll bring it up. Our last 8 games, we conceded 16 goals, and unfortunately, that's not good enough for a team that's fighting for a league title. And I know people will point to the fact that we had William Saliba out, but it goes to show that one quality player out of our defence gets injured, we kind of just, I wouldn't say capitulate, but we become very average in that department. Um, so I think defence we definitely need to work on. I would like Arsenal to bring in another centre back, and if Kieran Tierney is going to leave the football club, we definitely need another left back because we already know about Zinchenko's defensive deficiencies, and there's going to be games this season where you're going to have to shore it up a little bit more defensively. Of course, Declan Rice or Caicedo or even both. I mean, a lot of Arsenal fans were screaming for both. I'm not sure, getting both would be the best thing for Arsenal personally because, you kind of touched on it earlier. I don't think you need that many players in that role. And it's sure to see that we definitely need another number 6 to come in, whether Thomas Partey stays or he doesn't, to give us that depth. And that's one of the positions that we really struggle in. We see again last season when Thomas Partey wasn't on it, we was very average in the midfield department. And the big one for me, Jess, and I don't think Arsenal will get it done, is a striker.
Okay.
Somebody that can guarantee you 20 goals a season. Because I look on last season, right,
Mhm.
and what we did very well was we shared the goals around the pitch.
Mm.
So it kind of made up for the fact that Gabriel Jesus only came up with 12 goals last season for an out and out number 9. And I know he's played in a different type of role to your traditional striker, but for
Mhm.
an out and out number 9, 12 goals in a season, regardless of the injury, isn't that great. And we got away with it because we shared the goals around the pitch. Now I see it as a tougher task to do to get the same level of performances out of your Odegaards, your Sakas, your Martinellis, your Jesuses, even your Nketiahs, and get the same amount of goal contributions as what they gave us last season, then it is to go out there and buy a striker that guarantees you 20 goals a season. If one of them or two of them players in particular have a rough patch in the season, all of a sudden you'll start to see our goals dry up a little bit as well, and that's what worries me. I feel like we need a 20 goal a season guaranteed striker.
Well, what if you have a striker that guarantees you those goals per se, like on paper, but then they go through a goal drought? I think for me, like, if your system is built around multiple people sharing the goals, then you have the same issue still that you would have if you had one striker that you're trying to feed. Because that's the issue is in order to get somebody 20 something goals a season, you have to be feeding them more than everybody else. So Martinelli and Saka become less goal scorers, feeding this guy. If he
Mm.
drops off or gets injured, then what is your situation then?
See what you're saying. I do see what you're saying.
Mhm.
But I feel like you need to buy somebody in a similar sort who has a similar sort of attributes to Jesus. But my issue with Jesus is I just don't feel like he's clinical enough in front of goal. You know, I feel like he's too bothered about creating chances for other people, and he's not got that like striker's instinct where he's in the box in the right moments, taking opportunities and stuff. I feel like we need somebody who can offer us a little bit different to Jesus as well. Like for me, the perfect signing for Arsenal would be Ivan Toney, and of course we know he's banned. He's going to be out till January and all of that. I would still bring him in personally because he's a player, has similar attributes to Jesus. He can bring people into. He can link up play very very well, but he's also tall. He's strong. He's physical, and he scores goals. And I just see him as a perfect player to come in and kind of not necessarily start week in week out, because I believe that Jesus should be our main number 9. However, you've got that option there off the bench, and you've got that option there in difficult away games where you're going to have sides that are being physical with you, a bit like Newcastle, for example. When a side's tough to break down and they're physical and that, you could start Ivan Toney in them games and have Jesus coming off of the bench, and it just adds to the depth. It adds to the goals in our team as well. And I think that sort of signing would make a lot of sense.
Would you give up something in order to get the striker? Because we know that we're always working with a budget, and a lot of that budget is going to go to the midfield, and as it should. Like Arsenal still need better players in midfield. I'm of the feeling that midfield is definitely has a ceiling and it holds us back. Even though they're good and Arteta's gotten a lot out of Xhaka and Partey, we need more than that. And midfielders are expensive. So would you be willing to give up something else like a center back or a fullback in order to get that striker, knowing that we have like the likes of Holding or Tierney leaving or something like that? Because we know that defense at the end of the season ended up being maybe a bigger issue than scoring goals.
Mm. And again, I agree with you on that, but I don't feel like we'd have to give up anything in order to get a striker. I feel like if Arsenal are smart, they would sell Balogun and they would sell Eddie Nketiah to fund a new striker. And yeah, maybe we wouldn't get completely, the full amount that we'd need for a new striker like an Ivan Toney or whatever, but we'd get close to that, and we could kind of make up that funds type thing. I also feel like we've given up one area of the pitch anyway, in order to address other areas, because a lot of fans, including myself, I don't know if you was the same, Jess, but we all kept screaming that we needed sufficient cover for Bukayo Saka on the right hand side, somebody who could come in and offer him competition and provide him competition, because we see him played an awful lot of football again for Arsenal last season, and we've been very lucky in the sense that he hasn't really picked up many injuries at all, and he has been performing consistently week in week out, even though he hasn't really got the competition there. And we've decided to offer Reiss Nelson a new contract, rightly or wrongly, and I feel like that.
You thought it was? Do you think it was wrong?
Well, I feel like that deal in particular is a cost-cutting exercise by Arsenal, because let's be honest, if we're going to go out and we're going to sign a winger who's going to compete with Bukayo Saka and be just as good, if not better than Bukayo Saka, you're looking at a 50, 60, 70 million pound signing. So it's cheaper.
Reliably to Diaby from Bayer Leverkusen as well. But I hear what you're saying. Keep going.
So it's cheaper for Arsenal to offer Reiss Nelson a new contract than what it is to go out and spend 50, 60, 70 million plus wages on a new winger. So I kind of feel like we're freeing up a little bit of the budget. in order to maybe make these midfield signings like Declan Rice and stuff like that. But I
Yeah.
just feel like if we're going to go the extra mile and we want to compete and be up there with Man City and, you know, compete on all fronts, we have to go out and get a striker. We have to.
That's interesting because I have a feeling like that's a position that I want to see filled. Like I would love to see like a more physical, strong striker come in, but it's a lot lower on my priority list than it is for a lot of other people. Because I just feel like you lose a couple of those defenders and you're fucked, and it doesn't matter what you have going on up top because you can't build through the thirds, you can't defend, you can't do shit, you know. And I think the end of the season really scared me a lot, you know, seeing, you know, Saliba go down and not having Tamiyasu and really struggling at the back. That really made me like, yeah, we need to bring in at least one defender and then spend as much as possible in midfield. I think Declan Rice would be like a transformative signing for Arsenal, you know. And then you bring in another midfielder and then get a versatile, you know, kind of attacker. But I hear what people are saying about the striker position, and, you know, hopefully it's not something that leaves us short this next season, because often that's how we figure out what we need, is because it becomes glaringly obvious that we don't have that, you know, option there. But I just have this feeling that like bringing in somebody like a Tony, or, you know, even, you know, some of the more extravagant names would be so big, like in terms of the budget, that Arsenal just wouldn't go for it. But speaking of strikers, I did see that, you know, not Balogun, and Nketiah was like Brentford had reached out about Nketiah potentially to replace Ivan Toney. But Nketiah is probably a part of Arteta's plan, so it may not happen. One of the things that is like annoys me just a little bit is like there's players that are obviously not good enough that we should move on, but Arteta seems like maybe keen on keeping them in the team. Is that something that you feel like is going to like hold us back, is having players like Nketiah and stuff in the team that Arteta really trusts that don't really add anything? Because that's one of my things. It's like whether we replace him or not, I feel like we should just get rid of Nketiah. You know, like I don't see him adding anything. And if Brentford were willing to offer you 30 million for him, like obviously you bite your hand off. Like what is he going to add for us next season? Like, could you imagine going to the Bernabeu or the Allianz Arena with fucking Nketiah starting for you because Jesus got a knock? Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's one of the things that's like, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, because
Yeah.
I still feel like we've got a lot of dead wood in this squad. You know, you look at the players that we've got out on loan; they all need to be moved on. Rob Holding, clear as day, he needs to be moved on. Pepe, Nketiah, you know, is another one for me that, like you say, imagine going to the Allianz or the Bernabeu and you have to start Eddie Nketiah up front. It reminds me of the days when, you know, we was going there and getting slapped up 10-2 and we had players that were just not good enough. And I feel like if we're a big club who is serious, and this is the big thing for me, like, because obviously we are a big club, but if we're a serious football club, we'll do whatever's possible to go out there. And I mean, I don't see it as being an unreasonable thing for Arsenal to go out and spend 250, 300 million pounds this summer. I really, really don't. When you look at it in the cold light of day, if you was to get rid of all of them deadwood players, you'd command at least, for all of them, at least 70, maybe 80 million pound in total. When you think about Nketiah and Balogun as bringing in probably the most money out of the lot. And then, you know, we got that Champions League money as well. We have a budget anyway with the Premier League money and stuff like that. I don't see it as being an unreasonable thing for Arsenal to go out there and spend £300 million. And I think you can fill all them positions that we've spoken about: striker, midfield, you know, centre back, possibly even a fullback, for that sort of money as well. So it's just about us being smart in the transfer window. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to now that you've put it that way. Can you imagine?
I mean,
Oh God.
that's the first thing that popped into my head when I saw that report that, like, he was in Arteta's plans. I was like, "So do you actually see him, like, if something were to happen, like, end of the season, Jesus is injured, whatever happens, and you're starting Nketiah at the Bernabeu, like, you can't be serious and do that." And, like, I like Nketiah, but I just feel like he's clearly not good enough. Like, I feel like it's obvious even though he stepped in for a little bit of time, and we should potentially move him on. But, kind of going back to midfield, I have a very, like, blunt question I'm gonna ask you. No caveats, no nothing. Would you extend Thomas Partey's contract? Would you extend
No,
it? Okay.
no. With 2 years remaining on £200,000 per week, and this is the other thing as well, right? Where Arsenal need to start being careful, because if we was to extend Thomas Partey's contract at the age that he's at, with the injury record that he's got, he would want more money, right? And that's fair enough because we're back in the Champions League and all of that. But inevitably, what you'll end up doing then is you're setting a precedent for the rest of the players that you try to bring in, because they're going to look at that and go, well, he's on 250 grand a week. He's 30 years old. He's injured all the time. And I'm a better player, or I'm younger. I see myself as more of an important player for you. So I want 250 grand a week. And then you start going down that route again where, we're paying average players big wages. And we see this at Arsenal, remember Mustafi and Kolasinac.
Mhm.
And this
Yeah.
is why we end up having to pay players off in the end or let them go for free. So I wouldn't extend his contract, no, definitely not.
That's what the question I've been asking all day. Like, once the Partey news came out, I was like, of course you're not going to extend him. Like, you cannot extend Thomas Partey with, his injuries, with the fact that he hasn't necessarily been, like, he hasn't been a slam dunk signing. I would say, like, if you had to rate his Arsenal career so far, I would say it could be no more than a 6. Like, and 6 it would be nice, considering how big of a figure we expected him to be, wages he's on, we paid the entire release clause. Like, you're paying a 45 million pound release clause, like, in real life, not a release clause, that's a very expensive signing. So he hasn't really lived up to the hype, even though we know that he's a good player and he played a lot better this season, but still fell off. So with 2 years left, you can't extend him. And I see a lot of people saying, like, well, just keep him for another season. If I'm Thomas Partey and you keep me for another season, but you bring in a couple players that start playing in front of me, I'm going to stay for another year and run my deal down. Like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to go for free. Why would I leave with a year left if I'm getting paid 200 and something grand per week? So I feel like that's more of the scenario that Arsenal are in than anything else is, do we keep this guy, potentially have to lose him for free, you know, or do we sell him now when we can get 35, 40 million for him, and then replace? But the ideal scenario is to keep him for a year, but I feel like that's pretty risky. And Arsenal fans are always complaining about how we don't sell, but a lot of times selling players is about selling them when it's not obvious. Right now, it's not obvious to sell Thomas Partey, but in a year it will be, and by then it might be too late. Because I would sit on my deal if I was him, knowing that Saudi money will come, knowing that I'm in London and I'm chilling, knowing that I'm being paid quite a bit, So I feel like that's more the scenario than we're in more than Arsenal are like brain dead for wanting to get rid of Thomas Partey. It's like, I don't know. I feel like it's risky. I would hate to see him go for free. You know, who knows what physical condition that guy might be in. You know what I mean? By that point, I don't know. Let's see some of these comments. Iman Ever Live says, people told me with Champions League football, we'd be able to attract and sign good players. Well, if you don't think Rice or Lavia or Cancelo or any of these guys are, quality players, if you don't think that they are, then fair enough. But I think we are attracting good players. It's not Caicedo, which was the big one. When they said that we were going away from Caicedo, people were freaking out, and Kai Havertz as well. So I get that. Saksham says, to be honest, Partey is a baller when he's fit. Keep him for rotations. Bendover says, this is crazy, keeping Jorginho and El Neni but selling Partey. it's not always about just the quality issue. Again, like nobody like Edu, Tim Lewis, all of them, they're not just thinking about, well, Nenny and Jorginho versus Partey. They have to think about contractually what's going on, his off the field issues, if that's becoming something that's going to bite us in the butt in the future. Physically, is he going to be able to be somebody that we can rely upon? The wages that we're giving him, juxtapose like his actual contributions. So it's not just about, well, he's better than Jorginho and El Neni, get rid of one of them. It's like, if he could fetch 40 million, I don't think you can say no to that. Like, I don't. Now, if you're going to sell him for 15, 20, no, you don't sell him, right? Like, what would be your, like, if this bid comes in, you sell Thomas Partey?
Yeah, see, yeah, I think you're right. I think about 35, 40 million. Anything less than that, I wouldn't even entertain it. I wouldn't. Because yeah, it's a strange one really when you when you think of it like that. Arsenal are keeping hold of Jorginho and El Neni, and Partey and Xhaka are the ones to move on. But you know, what you can say about that is, Jorginho's a new signing, so contractually, he's here. He's got he's got a longer contract. Well, not a longer contract, but you're not really going to fetch much money for Jorginho, with his age and that. So you're better off maybe keeping him around the squad for his experience. He's, again, I'll mention it earlier. He's a player with Champions League experience. So just having that experience there might just be a help. The El Neni one, I think a lot of Arsenal fans kind of feel the same way, that it's time to move on from El Neni. I have
Mm-hmm.
no idea why we offered him a new contract, but we did. And, what can I say about that one? But yeah, Declan Rice coming in, and possibly Lavia, and maybe Havertz as well. I don't think it's going to be as bad as what people think it is.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think people like, I'm not saying that. I feel like right now, because everything is so emotive, especially after the way that the season ended, like there's a lot of like distrust and like very high emotions attached to every single link and every single rumor. But when you calm down a little bit, I'm sorry, Lavia and Rice are not like, you know, mechanics or bus drivers compared to Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka. I think this season for Granit Xhaka has been totally overblown. It was great, but it's not like that's as good as it's gonna get. Like he's never gonna play like that for us again. Like that's it. It's great that he's going out on a high, but it's never getting any better than that. Lavia to Thomas Partey, I feel like the only real difference between the two of them is experience. But like if we're being real, like he's a very talented player. So it's more about the squad depth and stuff like that, which I understand more than people trying to convince me that like Xhaka and Partey are like this impenetrable, like top of the line, like midfield duo. They're fucking not. Like they're not, because yeah, they're not.
Let me ask you this then, Jess, because
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of Arsenal fans up in arms about the Caicedo thing.
Yeah, yeah.
If you could only choose one out of Caicedo and Rice, which one would you have?
Oh, I'd choose Rice. The reason why is because I feel like they're gonna cost not necessarily, well, here, okay, they may not cost exactly the same, but they're both gonna be extremely expensive signings. And the thing about both of them that's really nice is they can play multiple positions. We know that Caicedo and Rice can both play multiple positions. But the difference for me, the main difference between Rice and Caicedo is that Rice has the leadership aspect of his game that I know a lot of people don't give a shit about. But when you are going to lose somebody like Granit Xhaka, you do have to replace those big personalities. And he has that. Caicedo has a personality, but not that leadership that Declan Rice has. So if I'm going to pay 100 million for a midfielder, I need to get everything. Leadership, quality, high ceiling, multiple positions, athletic, good injury record, all that kind of stuff. And Rice has all of that. So ideally, you'd want both. Like, of course, like the ideal world is to get both. But if I had to choose one or the other, I would definitely choose Rice, knowing that Caicedo is still going to be an excellent player. But I think Rice is going to be like, would be amazing for us. What about you?
Totally agree. Totally agree. Because I got asked this question a few weeks ago, and I would go for Declan Rice as well over Caicedo. Purely and simply, like you just said, the leadership aspect, the fact that Rice has got more experience than Caicedo. I mean, we tend to forget because Declan Rice is still a reasonably young player. He
Mm.
has had 5 or 6 consistent seasons in the Premier League at West Ham, and he's been the captain for the majority of them as well. So I look on that, and I just feel like, if we go back to last season again, what cost us at the end was the lack of leadership in the squad, you know, um, and it showed. And we definitely need to replace the leadership if Granit Xhaka is moving on, because people like to sit there and tell me that Odegaard's the captain, Odegaard's the captain. Odegaard's not the captain. Granit
Mm.
Xhaka's the captain. Odegaard just wears the armband, So that's how I look on it. And yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and like people are like experience, they're saying experience. It's not really the experience, it's the leadership. I actually don't rate experience as high as I do other things. Quality, personality, I think those things go a lot further than experience because we have players like Xhaka and Partey in our team that have a lot of experience, but they lacked personality when it really mattered. I think personality and that leadership and stepping up when it really matters, that's not really about experience. That's about if you have balls or not. Excuse my language, but that's kind of what it's about. I think Rice kind of has that where Caicedo, he kind of has that, but like he's not leading Brighton. Like he's really not. You can't lie to me and tell me that he is. But this is an interesting comment saying that Arsenal will lose a lot of the beauty in their play without Partey. If he goes, a lot of Arsenal's current appeal will go with him. Do you agree with that? Like, personally, I don't really care what it looks like if we're winning. Like I want attractive football, but like I'm not sure that like losing Partey means that we can't play good football.
Yeah, I agree. I see like very similar attributes between Thomas Partey and Declan Rice in the way that they control the midfield. So I don't think we'll lose too much from that. I actually probably think that Declan Rice is maybe a little bit better of a passer of a ball than what Thomas Partey is. Obviously, Thomas Partey, likes to get forward as well. We see him score a couple of absolute screamers for Arsenal this season, but that was only this season. Apart from that, he was hitting them in row Z. So yeah, I don't think we'll lose too much from it anyway. But we'll just have to wait and see, really, won't we?
Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of people kind of refer back to, our win percentage without Thomas Partey, and can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. One of the interesting things about our win rate without Thomas Partey is it's a lot lower than it is when we had like Sambi or El Neni playing there. But I don't necessarily feel like that's a good like positive thing for Thomas Partey. I think the fact that we can't really win without him and the fact that he's so absent so often when we really need him is actually why we need to think about the future beyond him. And it's not too hard to be better than El Neni and Sambi, but I don't think that that's, a reason why we shouldn't look to like do better. I don't think that that means that if you put Rice there, that like that percentage is going to go even lower. You know what I mean? I think we overplay that a little bit. Like when I saw the amount of big games that he missed, this was like earlier this season, like somebody had put out a list of all the big games that he missed. It really like hit home that like as good as he is, like he's such a good player, like on his day, in reality, like he's just not somebody that you can really rely upon. And so that win percentage for me doesn't really hold any weight because the reality is it's not like Arteta's playing El Neni or Sambi over Partey. It's that he's not available. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a saying in football: the best ability is availability. And it doesn't matter how much ability you've got if you're not available and you're not there when it matters in the big games and that. Unfortunately, you kind of have to look past it and try and figure out a way of moving on from that. And I think the football club. I personally think the football club are making the right decision. I do. I think it's a massive risk because of what we're expecting as a fan base next season, built off of what happened last season. And if we don't get that, obviously, people are going to have to be held accountable. And if all the transfers that come in don't live up to the expectation and they fail, then once again. But right now, it's all speculation. But if I was in charge of the recruitment side of things with Arsenal, I would also be looking at Thomas Partey's situation, the 2 years on his contract, the fact that he's getting older, the fact that he's got a horrendous injury record since being at Arsenal. Can you rely on him? No. Is he good when he's there though? Yes. But is there a possibility of replacing him with somebody else who's more available and offers the same qualities? Yes. So I'd be looking to do the same thing, maybe move him on, get the money now and bring in somebody else.
Exactly. And I think Rohan makes the best point is like selling Partey isn't an issue. It's like not replacing him. So, or replacing him with somebody that doesn't have the quality to like replicate or do what he does. And I get that, Declan Rice doesn't necessarily have the same passing range as Partey. Like I think Partey is a better passer, but when it comes to like interceptions, the defensive part of the game, being available, covering space, those types of things, Rice kind of is like way better than not way better, but he is much better than him at those things. And like the thing about Partey is just like I think with the dynamics changing, I'm not sure that we necessarily need that level of like incisive passing all the time. What we need is somebody with a little bit of bite, somebody that's going to win the ball back, somebody that's going to be aggressive, and then recycle it to the guys that play the football. I think that role is even going to change. And so, yeah, it's all about the replacement. And if it's, Lavia and Rice and Xhaka and Partey go, you know, it's a massive risk, but I'm not about to sit here and lie to you guys and say that I think that that's like a massive drop off in terms of quality because those are two really good players. They're younger. And we also saw when we went younger, I thought we were a lot more like dangerous. When we had that older group up front, no offense to like Aubameyang and Lacazette, like I know that they're quality players, but when we replaced like Lacazette and Aubameyang and like the Williams and stuff like that, and we went to more like Martinelli, Saka and stuff like that, I felt like we were more dangerous. So maybe even getting younger would help a little bit. I don't know. Trying to see the positive sides, but also I know that there's risks. Yo-Yo says signing Rice, Lavia now is believing their prime will better serve us than Xhaka and Partey's autumn years. Yeah, it's it's one of those where ideally you'd want them to overlap. Like you'd want to be able to keep Xhaka and Partey and bring in those two players and let it overlap so you don't have such like a harsh like transition. But it's a risk, but it could end up working or it could go against us. Gunna9 says them keeping faith in Arteta has nothing to do with him. It's about controlling the club's finances. Saksham says Edu will sign some random CM from Italian league, then we'll gas them up. I don't know if it'll come from the Italian league because like we don't sign people from the Italian league. Have we signed anybody from the Italian league? No, I don't think so. But yeah, hopefully not. Craig Barlow says Abba and Laka were awful. I won't say that they were awful. I think they played their roles and they did good jobs at certain times. But when we went younger, I did feel like we got better. So, Shaquille says, I think Kivior will be our new left back option or second option. That's why we'll go for a right back, right center back. I think that as well. I think it's kind of obvious like Arteta wants to have the option to invert on the other side. And so Kivior and Tomiyasu will play that role and hopefully we'll bring in a really good right back. If you had to bring in a right back, who would be your option? Like, is there somebody that you have in your mind that you're like, that would be the person that I want to bring in? Or are you more like if you had to choose between a right back or a center back, would you choose a center back? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a tough question, to answer. I think again, if we talk about availability being the best ability, we've seen from Tomiyasu that he's another player who's just not available enough, you know. And so Ben White hasn't got any real cover at right back, because that would obviously be Tomiyasu. But so I understand why we'd bring in a right back. Centre back, I just look at it with centre back wise as well, though. If we was to get an injury to either Saliba or Gabriel, I just think that changes the whole dynamic of our defence. So for me, I'd be looking to bring in a centre back over a right back personally, and just hope that Tomiyasu can stay fit, or sell Tomiyasu and get somebody who can stay fit, and bring in a right back as well. But I mean, I see Arsenal linked Cancelo, and I'm a little bit unsure on this one because, again, Cancelo is a very, very good player, top player, in fact. When it comes to being an attacking fullback, defensively though, very, very questionable. And we've already got Zinchenko, who's defensively questionable. I don't really want Cancelo, another player who's defensively questionable. When we already can't defend without Saliba in the team, so I don't really know about that one.
Yeah, it's a tough one, but I do feel like seeing Ben White in those last 2 games of the season go back to center back made me feel like we don't necessarily need to bring in another center back. We could just bring in a right back. A different option because Gabriel and Ben White have played together before, and so if we're thinking about like dynamics and players that know each other, knowing that you have Saliba or Gabriel or White and Gabriel to me makes the most sense instead of bringing in somebody else new that's never played with them before, and then just bring in a right back that changes the game a little bit. Yo-Yo's interesting because Yo-Yo's always in the chat telling me every single time that we talk about these City players coming to Arsenal that it brings out an inferiority complex, or like it solidifies Arsenal as always being like City light. Do you agree with that? Do you think that Arsenal need to like hold off on bringing in more City players and go after others because the fear is that we'll just be City light and never be able to really compete with Pep and City because we're always just trying to do something similar to them?
Yeah. Again, I understand that point as well. You can't compete with Pep Guardiola with the players that he now sees as disposable. And you're doing a similar type of thing as well. I do feel like we maybe need to move away from, keep signing Manchester City players all the time, and maybe come up with something different as well. But I also understand why we try and sign these Manchester City players, because they're going to come in. They're going to be, you're not going to have to teach them how to play the system. They've already played it, and they can play it to a high level as well. So I understand that as well. I'll be more worried if Arsenal start bringing out a sky blue kit. That's when I'll be worried, because it'll be like Manchester City Part 2.
Yeah.
But look, I don't know. What can you say about that? You're signing players from arguably the best team in the world. So,
Exactly. I mean, if it wasn't, I think it's all the close connections. I think it's Pep and Arteta's already was there. I think it's also the fact that we missed out on the title and they were the team that pipped us to it. So it's the feeling that like we don't want that, like we want to do something on our own. But at the same point, if it wasn't Pep's Man City and it was Pep's Barcelona and we were getting left like players from there, I don't think that we would have as big of like a feeling against it. And it's just a matter of like if we can build a team that's like, obviously you can have some of them, but you also have to have your own influences and be different than them. You can't just expect to do the exact same thing. But I would take Cancelo in a heartbeat. Like, I think if I know that he has like kind of an attitude thing, And I know that, like, defensively, he's not amazing, but, like, I would never expect us to play Zinchenko and Cancelo at the same time. We only invert on one side, so if Cancelo was playing, it'd be Kiwior or Tomiyasu on the other side. And he's just like a really, really, really top player on his day, and it's different to me than Zinchenko and Jesus, who I thought ended up being kind of surplus to requirements at City. Cancelo only really, I think, stopped playing for them when his attitude was not as great. I think he'd still be there if he hadn't acted out. Do you know what I mean? So I would take Cancelo. I would like for us to go after somebody that really changes the game instead of just a squad filler. Like when we were linked to Castagna, I could see why, but I kind of felt like he would just end up being another guy on the team sheet, that we didn't necessarily want to play. But I think Cancelo would be an amazing signing. But also, you never really know if he's like a bomb waiting to burst type of guy. Like, is he gonna like F up everything because he's, this guy that just can't get along with anybody? But I think he'd be a fabulous signing just like on the pitch. It begs the question what happens to Ben White, because you can't bring in Cancelo and then not start him, can you? So it'd be an interesting one, but like I would take him. Like I would like
Yeah, and there comes a point as well where Arteta is going to have to deal with players with big egos, and he's going to have to learn how to deal with them type of players. Because if you want to be the best and you want to compete and win trophies in all departments, you have to be able to control these big egos as well that come with the big players. So yeah, it'd be an interesting one.
One of the interesting things about, like, is, people are saying like, okay, Arsenal making a team out of like City and Chelsea rejects. The one thing that I'll say about that is there's not really a better hunting ground than the Premier League for players, because the Premier League is the best league in the world. Every manager wants to be in the Premier League. Top players want to be there. The most money, everybody watches the Premier League. Like, I think when you take your emotions out of it and just kind of like, you know, even if it's from your rivals or teams that you're not too fond of, like when you think about the quality coming from those teams, like you're not really seeing those from Serie A and the Bundesliga and stuff like that. Like, it's not, there's so much more talent in the Premier League. So I can see why Arsenal are looking within the Premier League to like invest in the squad. It's just not as comfortable because some of the teams we don't love. But I think the idea that like bringing in old Chelsea players or bringing in old City players or looking for players in the Premier League is like a bad thing, when we all know it's the best thing in the world, for me is a little bit like, come on, we're looking for the most talented players that fill our squad. You guys know that you can go to the Bundesliga and the French league and find players, but sometimes that doesn't translate to the Premier League. Maybe that's the reason why Arsenal do it, but that's just me. I don't really care where players come from as long as they're recruited properly. Like, it's not my favorite. It's not comfortable bringing in players from Chelsea, but if they're scouted properly, I'm kind of okay with it. You know what I mean? But some people have like a really big hang up about like players coming from their rivals. I don't know. People have been taking players off of us for years. I don't know if I
Yeah,
can.
that's it. People have been taking players off us for years. It makes change for us to take them off of other clubs, to be fair. The City thing, I don't really understand that, because if you look at it again in the cold light of day, Zinchenko and Gabriel Jesus have been a massive, massive part of the reason why we've, kind of skyrocketed in terms of like where we were last season to where we are this season. And they've definitely raised the bar and raised the level. The Chelsea thing, I understand that a little bit more, because we've had multiple players off Chelsea and they haven't exactly worked out in the way that we hoped that they would work out. So I understand that. But the Man City thing, like, I don't mind us signing players from Man City.
Yeah, it's not a big deal to me, even though I kind of understand, what people are saying. Let's look at these last couple of comments and we'll get out of here. CD's clip says, yes, but not Havertz. I hear that for sure. Rohan says, talent-wise, La Liga is great, but they don't have the PR. Sevilla, Madrid literally win every European Cup. Aman says, people have been taking our players, to be fair. Jay says, maybe Arsenal are back in for Zubamendi. I don't think Zubamendi is going to leave Sociedad. I think it's going to be hard to take a player like that off of his boyhood club that actually, I think they did qualify for Champions League. So, you know, I think from his perspective, like if he's not willing to leave there to go to Barcelona, I don't think he is going to leave and come to Arsenal, you know. So that's one that I kind of like. I think that's why we're looking at like Lavia instead, is because I don't think Zubamendi wants to leave. You know, that's my feeling. Boy says Clichy, Nasri, Sanya turned in City into league winners. They did. Also, like Pep added other players to it, but there's always been an overlap between like Arsenal, Man City, Barcelona. Like there's always been like, because you know the stylistically during that time like was always quite similar. So you know I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing in City players. They Zinchenko and Jesus picked that shit up quicker than anybody. You know, it's just a matter of making sure you just don't only rely upon them. You know, because it's not enough. Jay says, would not have been competitive for the title if it wasn't for Jesus and Zinchenko. Zinchenko got like a lot of shit at the end of the season. I get why, because defensively he's not great. But for like the majority of the season, like he was kind of like the difference. Like he was kind of like one of the most important and most like obvious reasons why we had went to such a different level. Jesus a little bit different because like he spent so much time out. But yeah, I think they've gotten a little bit of shit. And I think they deserve it a little bit because they both kind of had issues towards the end of the season, but we definitely would be nowhere near where we are without them. Yo-Yo says it's not about the rivalry, it's about the genuine inferiority complex that's developed at the club. Please take a look at our Prem record versus City. I mean, that was there before we even like took any players off of them. There's something, it was there even before Arteta was there. Like it was there when Wenger was there, it's there when Emery was there, it's there when Arteta's there. Like I think we just genuinely and it was with Liverpool too, like before that. I just think genuinely we have a very difficult time against teams that we don't necessarily feel like we can actually beat. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily know if it's like an Arteta and City thing because like Wenger was getting beat by them too, like when he was here, you know. So it's from way before we even got any of their players, in my opinion. Jimmy Mack says the difference between is we sold our best players, but we are buying players who don't start regularly at their clubs. That's fair enough. I'm like the thing is like yeah, we did send like some of our better players did end up going there, but like at the same time, like I think it doesn't really matter. Like Clichy was a good player, but like did you rate Clichy very highly? Because I didn't.
Nah, I weren't a massive fan of Clichy, to be fair.
Yeah,
It's hard to be a fan of Clichy when you've seen the likes of Ashley Cole, though, you know.
yeah.
So
I can understand if they were taking like an Ashley Cole off of us or something like that, but you know, it is what it is. Like we take players, we're taking players off of them. They took players off of us. They were able to make that into something and kind of like build up their momentum. If we had won the league, I don't think people would be having like this such like a you know against bringing in those players. I think they'd be like, yeah, let's get more. Do you know what I mean? We didn't. But yeah, you guys, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. It's been like an hour and 40 minutes, but thank you guys so much for joining the stream. I really appreciate it. Obviously, nothing is set in stone with Thomas Partey, but the rumors, the fact that Arsenal have already did like initial talks with Romeo Lavia, it is a possibility that Thomas Partey could leave the club in the summer. So obviously get in the comments after and let me know what you think about that. We talked about everything under the sun in terms of transfers. I know people are very like worried and apprehensive about what's going to happen in the in this window, but it's still early, we know nothing. And yeah, but you do with the information what you want to do with it. It is what it is. Make sure you guys, like I said, like this video, subscribe to the channel. Brandon, thank you so much for joining the stream. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, y'all.